I'm interested in everything around this notion of national security, and in particular around the changing nature of the threat. If you go back as far as some of the political philosophers, Locke and Hobbes and those others, even to the Treaty of Westphalia, what you see is that it was all about sovereignty and the power of a state and how it exercised its power and its exclusive authority to use force. Well, that's all gone. We've still got states, but we also now have non-state actors. We've just seen the death of a proto-state in the Caliphate in Iraq. But we see that many industries, many companies, and I think of Walmart, for example, they've got more money and more power and more trading power than many other countries. So what is the changing nature of sovereignty? What is the changing nature of how we secure ourselves? And so I really enjoy talking to the students about that. When you look at the role of government, when you look at the role of alliances, many of the students are studying in their various parts of their degrees, which is politics and international relations. They're studying globalisation. And you've only got to read Friedman and Philip Bobbitt and Terror and Consent. And they talk about the market state. And in many cases, the market is more powerful than the state. So how does that work? What's the role of the United Nations? So it's a really rich field. Here in Australia, I'm very interested in how we protect ourselves from terrorism. Globally, I've expressed a point of view that I think this is a centuries-long fight against terror, and that's because of the strong way that they follow an ideology, essentially based on Sayyid Qutb. I'm also interested in the role of the United Nations, how that works, and clearly the growth of other countries. And so one question I like to ask the students is, how long do you think the Westphalian world is going to last? How long will states be dominant? But similarly, there's another question. How long do we think that the post-Second World War arrangement of states will last? And by that I mean the Bretton Woods Agreement, the International Monetary Fund, the United Nations, and what's happening there. And that is something really important, because if you're listening to our foreign minister and you're listening to strategists around the globe and other foreign ministers and leaders, presidents and prime ministers, you'll hear them defending the international rules-based order. And what they're referring to there is what happened in the late 1940s and the early 1950s. And what we're seeing is the rise of China and the rise of Russia. In fact, Coral Bell, who was a strategist who wrote at the Australian National University, talked about in this new world, which she said was the post-Vasco da Gama era, that is, the loss of Western influence over Asia. She talks about the rise of China and the rise of Russia, and also mentions Islam. And I think she very cleverly said, I think we can accommodate China, and maybe the jury's out on that. I think we can accommodate Russia, but she wasn't sure about Islam. Now, I'd quickly add, she meant Islamists, those who are purveying terror, those who are spreading terror around the place. I think, so in all of that area, there's a lot to talk about. And what does it mean to Australia in terms of our policy, in terms of our budget, and the decisions we make to deploy force? China, I think we should welcome in a constructive way. The benefits, of course, are that for China and for Chinese, this is the greatest lift of people out of poverty that the world has ever seen. So we should be happy for that. We should be grateful for that. With regard to China, some people talk about the fact that we have to make a choice, and that is between our economic future, which frankly is China, or our security future, which is our long-term alliance with the United States. Now, I don't think we have to make a choice, because I think it would be a very difficult choice. A choice between China and the United States is not necessary. I think we can work with both. And in fact, I think the problem would be that there isn't a choice. We need both. Peter Harcher, who writes for the Sydney Morning Herald, in about 2010 wrote what I think was a terrific little ditty that said, "A creditor-debtor relationship between China and the United States is the financial equivalent of nuclear mutually assured destruction." Globalisation has happened. the two communities, the global community, is really intertwined, and I don't think we can pull it apart. Who's going to win a trade war? We will all lose. Who's going to win any form of combat war? We will all lose. So we have to use diplomacy, we have to keep talking, we have to try and understand China. And if I go back to those issues I talked about, the way that the world is changing from the post-1945 UN international rules-based order, I think we've got to make room for China. But how much room do they want? How do we do that? So I've really enjoyed and pondered and perhaps been a little bewildered by China and their strategies, because I think they're beating us pants down for strategy at the moment. China and the South China Sea, the new geographic facts and the militarisation of those. We didn't see that coming. The Asia Investment Infrastructure Bank, we saw that coming a little bit, but then we sort of demurred and said, well, not sure, and then we joined in. But the Belt and Road Initiative, I think the key thing about that is it's huge. It's global and it's long term. We don't know what to do about that. And as you know, I've just been in Sri Lanka and I've been down to Hambantota. I've been up at Colombo and seen the work that's going on in there, the construction and the roads and the ports that are being built. We don't know what to do about it. We are, I think, strategic minnows. We don't think long term, we don't think big scale, and part of this is down to our politicians. They're thinking in election cycles where Chinese are thinking in generational cycles. So we need to think, well, one belt, one road could be a good thing. How do we get to be part of that? So I think my point there is, let's think big. And if we're talking about strategy, let me also try and bring a few of these sort of threads together. Our alliance partner is the United States. And we will almost always be part of what the United States does. And in my old language, and when I was talking around Asia and the United States and Europe, you talk about common hopes and aspirations and the values and the complementarity of that for Australia and the United States. So I think we'll be, if you like, in their camp. But what I don't see at the moment is an independent capability for Australia to be able to assess and act on our own national interests. And that's what I want to see that we become more proficient at, and something that I'm trying to push here at the university is, well, let's think strategically rather than tactically. Let's think that, and Neil James from the Defence Association was good on this, and he said, we are strategic followers, not strategic leaders. And I get a little uncomfortable when I see politicians talking about Australia being a creative middle power. I think we're pumping ourselves up a little bit. We could be a creative middle power if we were able to assess and think about strategy. And let's look, the end of last year, 2017, we saw the publication of the first foreign policy paper since 2003. How can you look outside? How can you face the world and think about it in a constructive sense if there's 14 years between your foreign policy white papers? So they're the sorts of things that I'm trying to push here, and things that I enjoy. Ask difficult questions and try and make the students think about it rather than, and I talk to them and say, I'm not here to teach you what to think. What I want to do is teach you how to think so you can make these assessments in a really rapidly changing world.